I'm taking a bit of a break from Girls and Panzer this week to talk less about one specific show, but more about an element relevant to many stories. To do so, I'm going to be taking a look at another show that holds a special place for me, Goblin Slayer. Now, Goblin Slayer doesn't occupy the same pedestal Girls and Panzer does for me, but it was the show that got me back into anime after more than a decade not watching anything, and I still quite enjoy it. It is a good show, and I'll probably spoil some things in this video, so if you want to avoid that, here's your warning. Also, just beware that there are some disturbing scenes in it, but not as many as the first episode might lead you to believe, so it's definitely not for everyone. All that said, let's get on to the main topic for today. That is, what makes a character's abilities, magical or otherwise, more interesting? The powers themselves or their limitations? What they can do or what they can't do? For me, it's definitely the latter. Best-selling fantasy author Brandon Sanderson summed this up well in one of his laws of magic. Limitations are greater than powers, meaning the limitations set on a character's abilities are more interesting than the abilities themselves. Of course, it needs to be stated that anything can be done well, even characters who are ridiculously overpowered. It just depends on what sort of story you're trying to tell and how you do it. And no one should feel lesser, of course, for enjoying those sorts of stories. So everything here is just my opinion, though obviously I'm not alone in them. Now, back to Goblin Slayer. One of the things I like the most about this show is that Goblin Slayer himself, as well as his entire party, really are not particularly powerful. They're all good at what they do, but they really don't have much in the way of raw power at all, which is seen when they struggle against both single powerful foes and large numbers of weaker ones. However, they find ways to win despite this. In a story that's more on the dark and gritty side, having powerful main characters would undermine the tone and their struggles. The show knows this, and mentions that while there are more powerful people on this world, they're doing other stuff, and not our focus here. If Goblin Slayer was some uber-powerful swordsman, and his party's mages could just fireball all the goblins at will, these action scenes, while flashy, wouldn't be as exciting to watch. Part of what makes this particularly entertaining stems from our natural inclination to root for the weaker underdog. But another part of it comes from just enjoying seeing characters we like overcome difficult challenges in creative ways. However, seeing them find clever ways to win despite the odds is a ton of fun. One of the best moments of the entire series was when Goblin Slayer killed that ogre with the portal scroll. Even with all their combined strength and abilities, his entire team had no chance against it. But Goblin Slayer, with his out-of-the-box way of thinking, had an answer. The portal was linked to the bottom of the sea, where the water is extremely high pressure. So, when released through a narrow opening, it sliced through the ogre as easily as a water jet cuts through titanium. It was just such an awesome moment. Another really clever use of magic is in the scene in the finale of the first season, when Goblin Slayer and Priestess fight against a much more skilled and tough Goblin Lord. Utilizing shield spells to pin him in place was brilliant, and awesome to see. It's the kind of thing that fans will theory craft when it comes to any magic system, finding out-of-the-box ways to use even the most basic spells. Other fun examples in anime of characters whose limitations or weaknesses make both them and action involving them much more interesting include Shield Hero before now Fumi Shield could basically do anything and ruin that, and Chisato's reliance on her eyes in Lycora's recoil. With the former, one of, if not the best action scenes in the entire show was his early duel with the Spear Hero. Now, Fumi had no chance in a straight-up fight, but he was able to cleverly make use of defensive spells and those chompy ball monsters, or whatever they were called, to pull out a win. Or at least he would have if a certain someone hadn't interfered. And with the latter, Chisato struggling and adapting to fights where her beyond-perfect vision can't be used to help her predict the enemy's moves, make those scenes so much more tense and exciting from both a pure action perspective and from a character one as well. Of course, it's hard to directly compare those two shows, as Shield Hero is an action-adventure show whose premise was, in part, at least at first, Fumi having to struggle despite his limitations, while Lycora's Recoil's action is more of a backdrop for a great character drama. Also, Chisato's losing her superpower in the dark is technically a weakness, while Fumi's defensive magic focus was a limitation. There is a difference, but the general point holds. Action is much more satisfying when characters are at a disadvantage and have to rely on cleverness. Girls and Panzer obviously showcases this too. Ori is always outmatched both in terms of numbers and in tank quality and squad composition, but they make clever use of what they have to win despite all that. But Goblin Slayer really puts this front and center. It's a show essentially about blue-collar journeyman adventurers cleaning up messes most people ignored, and occasionally getting into things that are way over their heads, while finding ways out of it utilizing their wits. Scaling up their power level beyond a certain point, even if the power of their enemies was increased in proportion, would lead to a very different feeling and less fun show. You don't see fantasies with a low power cast very often these days, so it really stands out in a positive way while staying exciting and engaging all the way through. The scene where they fight a not beholder, they couldn't call it that for copyright reasons, is another great example of the team taking on a much more powerful creature in a creative way, utilizing cleverness in the entire team's skill. Elf Archer to distract it and wake it up when needed, Dwarf Shaman to get it drowsy long enough for Goblin Slayer to get the finely powdered flower in place, Lizard Priest to summon something to provoke an attack by the monster, and finally Priestess to summon a shield to protect them from the explosion. It's brilliant, and a blast, literally, to watch. And finally, if it wasn't already clear that the power of creativity was a major theme of the show, Goblin Slayer states it himself, as he has Priestess use a shield to trap goblins in their burning lair in the first half of the season. This is a concept I had in mind when I started work on my own light novel series, Light Unto Another World. I gave my hero, Uriel, magic that lets him create and control light, which is something that's not particularly useful in a direct combat sense, like in any other types of magic, but that let me have him find creative ways to utilize it, while also giving his party members more time to shine in battles. It's more fun for me to write, and, based on reader feedback, it's more fun for them to read as well. But I don't want to get too far afield here. My full thoughts on overpowered main characters, particularly in isekai stories, will need a video all its own. I could give some examples on how light magic is utilized in my books, but I think it would be more fun for you to see it for yourself if you catch my meaning. To sum things up, Goblin Slayer is a perfect example of a show and a hero who utilizes cleverness, both as an individual and as a party leader, to find victory even when the odds are stacked against them, instead of raw power, and it gives us a fun, exciting show to watch. So, for anybody watching who is thinking of writing something of their own, this is a good rule, for lack of a better term, to bear in mind. Though again, it's worth reiterating that you're never obligated to follow so-called writing rules, since anything can be done well. But speaking from experience, giving a character more limitations than powers is often a wise choice. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support my channel, my books and light novels are all available on Amazon, and you could also check out my Patreon. Along with other rewards, all supporters there get to see my videos early. And, of course, if you have any thoughts on the video, definitely share them in the comments section below. I'd love to hear them, and I do my best to read and respond to all of the comments. That's all for now, so farewell till next week, when we'll be back to talking Girls and Panzer once again.